Imagine you're born into the most powerful empire on earth. Endless wealth, golden palaces, silk carpets, jewels that blind you when they catch the sun. But before you can even walk, someone leans over your cradle and whispers, "One day your own brother will try to kill you, and you'll have to kill him first." Welcome to the Ottoman Empire, where the throne wasn't inherited, it was taken. Where princes didn't grow up dreaming of becoming sultan. They grew up training to survive their brothers, and the empire didn't just allow this, it required it. Tonight we uncover the darkest, quietest war in history, a war fought not between nations, but inside a single family. This is the story of an empire built on brotherhood and held together by blood. If you're new here, please subscribe. Now, let's step quietly into the palace halls, because the walls remember everything. The Ottoman Empire is often remembered for its incredible architecture, powerful armies, brilliant administrators, and centuries of dominance. But hidden behind all of that success was a system so brutal, so chilling, that modern audiences think it must be exaggerated. It's not. See, most empires struggle with succession. Kings die, relatives fight. Civil war erupts, and the dynasty collapses. The Ottomans watched everyone else fall, from the Seljuks to the Mongols to the Mamluks, and they said, "We're not doing that." So they invented something unique, something horrifying, something that shocked even their enemies. Sultanic Fratricide, the legal right, written in ink, stamped with imperial authority, for a new sultan to execute his own brothers, even infants, to secure the throne, not out of cruelty, not out of hatred, but out of strategy, because to them a dead prince was better than a civil war. Let that sink in. In most families, brothers fight over toys. Ottoman brothers fought over survival. And the most terrifying part wasn't the killing, it was the waiting, the uncertainty. Imagine being a prince, a literal child, maybe 8 or 10 years old, and knowing every night that if your father died in his sleep, your older brother would become sultan at dawn, and your life would end before breakfast. You couldn't play freely. You couldn't sleep peacefully. You were raised in a beautiful palace, but you were living in a cage made of prophecy. Some princes wrote poetry about the fear. Some went mad. Some tried to escape. Some plotted rebellions before their voices had even fully changed. And some, the most ambitious, trained secretly for the moment they knew would come. Not the coronation, the purge, but to understand how this chilling system became normal, we need to go back to the origins, to the time when Osman's small beylik began growing too fast, too wide, too powerful. Because with every conquest came more wealth, more land, more opportunity, and more brothers. And that meant only one thing. The quietest war in Ottoman history had officially begun. If you really want to understand why the Ottoman princes grew up trusting no one, not even the ones who shared their own mother, you have to start with the system they were born into. Because from the moment an Ottoman prince took his first breath, he wasn't just a child. He was a potential threat. A threat to his father, a threat to his brothers, a threat to the empire. And the empire treated him exactly like that. Imagine this. You're a young prince, maybe 8 years old. You're sent far away from the capital, away from your mother, away from the warm palace halls, and thrown into a province as its future governor. This wasn't a reward, it was a test. The empire was basically saying, if you can't handle a city, how will you ever handle an empire? But there was an even darker reason behind this tradition. You see, by spreading the princes across different regions, Amasya, Manisa, Konya, Trabzon, The empire unintentionally planted the seeds for war, because whichever prince ruled the closest province to Istanbul had the fastest route to the throne. And in the Ottoman world, speed wasn't just an advantage. It was survival. Take the story of Prince Selim and Prince Ahmed, the sons of Sultan Bayezid II. Each brother ruled a different province, each building an army, each waiting for the father to die, because the moment the Sultan's body grew cold, the sprint to Istanbul began. And that sprint decided everything. Whoever reached the capital first was crowned Sultan. Whoever arrived second, or was usually executed, not because he did anything wrong, not because he rebelled, but because he existed, and existence alone was enough to be considered a threat. You see why Ottoman princes slept lightly. Egypt has pyramids. China has the Great Wall. The Ottomans, they built a system where brotherhood was just another word for rivalry. But it gets darker. Because as these princes grew into young men, they didn't just gather soldiers. They gathered spies, advisors, loyalists, enemies, everyone picking sides, everyone whispering into the ears of the future rulers. And this turned every prince into a small portable version of a civil war. The empire had many enemies: Safavids to the east, Venetians to the west, Hungarians to the northwest, Mamluks to the south, but none of them were as dangerous as an Ottoman prince with ambition. The worst wars in Ottoman history weren't against crusaders. They weren't against Europeans. They weren't even against the Mongols. They were fought against their own blood, brother against brother, son against father, cousin against cousin. The empire was built on conquest, but maintained through elimination. And the people closest to you were the ones most likely to kill you. Princes were taught poetry, politics, strategy, and war. But the most important lesson was always unspoken. Trust no one. Not even the ones who look like you, sound like you, grew up with you. And this culture of paranoia didn't just shape the princes. It shaped the entire empire. It shaped its policies, its brutality, its intelligence networks, and even the architecture of its palaces. Every shadow was suspicious. Every banquet could be poisoned. Every celebration could end in a silent execution. This was the Ottoman Empire's greatest secret. Strength didn't come from unity. It came from fear. And the deeper we go, the worse it gets. Because in the next part, we get to the moment when this deadly game becomes official, written into law by one of the greatest sultans in Ottoman history. If the previous part felt dark, wait, because this is where we drop into the shadows completely. Because this is the moment the Ottoman Empire stopped pretending that their power struggles were accidents or tragedies and turned them into official state policy. And it all happened under one man, Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror, the man who took Constantinople, the man who rewrote the fate of the world. But what people forget is that after he conquered a city, he conquered something even more difficult: his own family. Mehmed grew up in the brutal world of Ottoman succession politics, where every sunrise was a reminder that one of his brothers waking up alive was a potential threat. And when he finally became sultan, he wasn't confused about what needed to be done. He was ruthless, focused, cold, and he believed one thing above all: better one body force than an empire collapse. This single sentence shaped Ottoman history for the next 400 years. Here's how it happened. When Mehmed took the throne, he didn't just inherit the empire. He inherited the chaos his predecessors left behind. Civil wars, rebellions, pretenders, scheming princes, rival factions. Every time a sultan died, the empire fractured like a plate shattering on a stone floor. Mehmed didn't see this as a coincidence. He saw it as a disease, And he decided to cure it with the most brutal medicine imaginable. He created the law of fratricide, a law that said, in polite legal language, that a newly crowned sultan had the right to execute his brothers for the sake of order. But let's be honest, it wasn't for order. It was survival. It was control. It was the empire choosing stability over morality. And just like that, murdering your younger brothers went from being a crime to being your first official duty as sultan. Imagine being a prince at that moment. Imagine being a mother in the harem, knowing half your children were born marked for death. Imagine being a soldier who had to carry out the execution. Mehmed didn't invent fratricide. That had existed long before him. But he did something much more powerful. He legalized it. He gave it structure. He gave it legitimacy. He made sure no one could question it. And the empire loved him for it. Because the Ottomans had a choice. One dead prince, or a civil war that kills thousands. And after centuries of rebellions, assassinations, and tribal infighting, the answer seemed obvious to them. Kill one, save millions. It sounds cold now, but to the Ottomans it was logic. And Mehmed didn't just write this law for the next sultans. He tested it himself. The story goes that after he became sultan again at 19, he ordered the execution of his infant half-brother. A baby, a child, a boy not even old enough to walk.
Why?
Because that infant had a loyalist faction forming around him. Because ambitious men looked at that baby and saw a future puppet. Because in the Ottoman world age didn't matter. Only threat did. It's a horrifying story, but it set the tone for everything that came afterward. Mehmed's heirs followed the same path. Selim the Grim, Suleiman the Magnificent, Murat the Third, Mehmed III, Ahmed Pa. Some hesitated. Some executed dozens. Some killed only one. But all lived under the same chilling law. If you spare your brother, you risk losing the throne. If you kill your brother, you risk losing your soul. And the people understood this tension. The harem understood it. The grand viziers understood it. The Ottoman Empire wasn't built only on military genius or brilliant administration. It was built on a quiet, relentless, calculated fear. A fear that ensured no prince ever slept peacefully. A fear that ensured the sultan would never be weak. A fear that, ironically, held the empire together. Until it didn't. Because in part 4, we dive into the first truly horrifying moment, when this law is used to its full monstrous extent. And trust me, this is where the story becomes unforgettable. Imagine you are a prince of the Ottoman Empire. You wake up every morning in a palace so silent you could hear a servant breathe from the other side of the courtyard. Because silence meant survival. Noise meant news. And in this world, news usually meant someone had died. This was life under Sultan Selim the Poor, Selim the Grim, the man who didn't just play the game of fratricide, he industrialized it. Selim wasn't interested in sharing power, discussing deals, or playing palace politics like a civilized royal. No, Selim treated the Ottoman throne like a single chair in a dark room. Sit first or die trying. And anyone else who tried to squeeze into that chair? He removed them without hesitation. So when Selim took power in 1512, he did something that even by Ottoman standards was brutal. He eliminated his brothers, then their sons, then grandchildren. He cleaned out his bloodline so thoroughly that even distant cousins probably slept with their shoes on. It wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was the system, and he followed it to the extreme. But here's the twist that blows people's minds. Selim wasn't a monster in the way his enemies described him. He believed he was saving the empire. In his view, he wasn't committing murder. He was removing future civil wars, future rebellions, Future bloodshed, future chaos. Selim believed the empire had one beating heart. If that heart split, the body would collapse. So he chose unity through fear, and the empire expanded like wildfire under his rule. But the real horror wasn't what Selim did. It was the effect it had on the next generation of princes. Boys, not even old enough to grow a mustache, were raised knowing that the moment their father died, their life turned into a countdown. Some would be sultans, most would be corpses. Imagine being 12 years old and hearing a servant whisper your fate behind the curtains. Imagine studying mathematics, poetry, horseback archery, while also preparing mentally for the possibility that your own brother would one day send the executioner for you. This was not a normal empire. This was a throne sharpened to a blade, and every prince who sat on it knew: rule strongly or rule briefly, because the Ottoman Empire had no peaceful inheritance, no slow transfer of power, no polite transitions with smiling politicians shaking hands. No, Ottoman succession was a battlefield without banners, a war fought in silence, a war fought in shadows, a war fought in the family you were born into. And the world never saw this war, because it all happened behind palace walls. But the question remains, if this was the system, if this was the rule, if every prince grew up knowing this was their destiny, why did no one try to change it? Why didn't a single sultan stand up and say, enough, we end the bloodline massacres now? The answer is darker than you think. Ottoman princes were raised in palaces filled with tutors, scholars, and elite guards, but behind all the luxury was a truth everyone pretended not to talk about. Every prince knew he might never reach adulthood, not because of disease, not because of war, but because of the political roulette built into their family. A prince could be studying astronomy in the morning, practicing archery at noon, and by evening he might hear that his older brother had just been appointed governor of a province. That single announcement meant a silent shift in destiny. It meant someone was getting closer to the throne, and someone else was getting closer to the execution chamber. This was how the Ottoman system worked. Each prince was sent to govern a province as preparation for future rule. Officially, it was training. Unofficially, it was surveillance. Princes were watched. Their friends were watched. Their letters were intercepted. Every step they took was recorded and shipped back to the capital. Because potential rebellions didn't start with armies, they started with whispers. A single rumor that one prince was more beloved by the people or more talented than the heir could get someone killed. And the worst part? The threat didn't come from outside enemies. It came from the palace, from officials, from jealous statesmen, and most painfully, from their own blood. The closer a sultan came to death, the more intense the pressure became. Brothers who had grown up sharing meals suddenly stopped trusting each other. Letters between provinces were written like chess moves. Every prince knew the math. Only one of them would survive the next transition. If a sultan had 2 sons, the empire held its breath. If he had 3 or 4, people started sharpening knives behind the curtains. If he had 6 or more, the palace practically turned into a silent battle arena. And then came the real nightmare, the moment the sultan died. The empire didn't officially announce it right away. The court kept it secret just long enough to see which prince got the news first, and how fast he moved, because speed decided survival. A prince who reached Istanbul first could declare himself sultan. A prince who arrived second was at risk. A prince who arrived third, well, history books rarely remember third place. This wasn't a succession. It was a race. And the finish line wasn't a crown. It was life itself. That's why many princes kept loyal riders stationed at every major road. Some even bribed messengers to deliver news early. Others forged alliances with army commanders long before their father died. Living like this didn't just shape the system, it shaped the minds of the future sultans. Some became ruthless, some became paranoid, some became brilliant leaders under immense pressure, and some broke. The palace produced conquerors and madmen, geniuses and tyrants, all because the system demanded only one thing: survive your family. If there's one Ottoman succession struggle that feels like it was written by HBO, Netflix and a medieval historian all at the same time, it's the war between Bayezid Deku and Cem Sultan. This wasn't just a family dispute. This was a global political hostage drama that turned two brothers into symbols, weapons and bargaining chips across Europe. And it all started the moment their father, Mehmed the Conqueror, died. The man who took Constantinople, the man who reshaped the world, gone. And with him, whatever fragile peace existed between his sons. Bayezid, the elder brother, was governor of Amasya. Cem Younger was governor of Konya. The second Mehmed died. Messages shot across the empire like lightning. But even with fast riders, even with secret messengers, the truth was this: whoever reached Istanbul first would sit on the throne. Bayezid sprinted. Cem scrambled. Both men knew exactly what the stakes were. Bayezid had the advantage. His province was closer. His political supporters were stronger. He reached the capital first. He was crowned sultan before Cem even got halfway there. But here's where the story gets wild. Most princes would accept defeat or prepare for execution. Cem didn't. Cem said, "Nah, let's run this back." Within weeks, he declared himself the rightful sultan. He raised an army. He rallied supporters. He marched toward Bursa, the old Ottoman capital. He even printed coins with his name on them, one of the ultimate symbols of sovereignty. Now it wasn't just succession. It was full-blown civil war. The empire split. Officials took sides. Soldiers whispered in their tents at night, wondering whose name would be carved into history and whose would be erased. The two brothers met in battle. Bayezid won. Cem fled. But here's the twist. He didn't surrender and he didn't hide. He went to the Knights of St. John. Yes, a Muslim prince, brother of the Ottoman Sultan, fled to a Crusader Catholic military order for help. And they said, "Sure, we'll help, as long as we can use you as a human bargaining chip." That's how Cem, a royal Ottoman prince, ended up living as an honored prisoner, or depending on the day, a very fancy hostage. His presence was political gold. The Pope wanted him. The French wanted him. The Kingdom of Hungary wanted him. Everyone wanted the spare prince who could challenge Bayezid's throne. Bayezid, now comfortably ruling the empire, looked at this chaos and said, "How much do you want to keep my brother locked up forever?" He literally paid European powers yearly salaries to not release Cem. Cem became the most expensive prisoner in the world. He was kept in palaces, villas, and castles, given luxurious meals, tutors, translators. But all the while, everyone around him used him for their own diplomatic games. Meanwhile, back in Istanbul, Bayezid ruled under a constant shadow. His brother was alive. His brother had sympathizers. His brother could return at any time with a European army. No amount of gold could erase that fear. And then something unexpected happened. The Pope suddenly had a genius idea. Take Cem on a crusade. Imagine that flex, using the Ottoman Sultan's own brother to lead Christian armies against him. Even Bayezid would have had to respect the creativity of that plan. But before that could happen, Cem died. Some said illness. Some said overwork. Some whispered poison. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. The greatest political hostage in European history was gone. Bayezid wept when he heard the news. They may have been rivals, but they were still brothers. The world saw two princes fighting for the throne. But beneath all the drama, the wars, the politics, this was a tragedy disguised as a power struggle. Bayezid won the empire, but lost his family. And the Ottoman succession system marched on, ready to repeat the same cycle with the next generation. If there is a single moment in Ottoman history where the empire stopped pretending it was a family and officially admitted it was a machine, a cold, efficient, unstoppable machine, it's this one. Because after centuries of brothers killing brothers, cousins poisoning cousins, and princes fighting civil wars that tore the empire apart from the inside, one man finally said, "Enough. If blood must be spilled, let it be quick, clean, and controlled." That man, Sultan Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror. Yes, the same man who took Constantinople, the same man who turned the Ottoman Empire into a global superpower. He didn't just conquer cities, he conquered chaos itself. The problem: the Ottoman dynasty grew fast, too fast. Every sultan had multiple sons. Those sons grew up in luxury, wealth, and power. They were educated, trained, and told from childhood. You could be the next ruler, but there could only be one. And every time a sultan died, the empire became a battlefield. Supporters of different princes formed factions. Governors declared loyalty to different heirs. Entire armies split down the middle. This wasn't just drama. It was national suicide. Mehmed II saw this firsthand when he wrestled power from his rivals. He saw the civil wars between Bayezid and Cem. He saw governors betraying each other. He saw the empire nearly collapse multiple times, not from invaders, but from the royal family itself. So he made a decision that would change everything. A decision modern audiences find chilling, but the Ottomans considered necessary. Mehmed II passed a law that essentially said, when one son becomes sultan, he may remove his brothers to prevent civil war. Remove, a very polite word for something not polite at all. This was formalized as the Ottoman law of fratricide. In simple terms, the first prince to claim the throne had the legal right to execute his brothers so they wouldn't challenge him. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't secret. It was written into the official imperial law code. Imagine that. Imagine being a child, playing games in the palace gardens, eating sweets, racing your brothers, and knowing one day you might have to kill them, or they might kill you. Being born a prince in the Ottoman Empire was not a blessing. It was a countdown. To outsiders, this looked barbaric. To the Ottomans, it was brutal, but brilliant. Think about it. You could lose one prince, or lose hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a civil war. You could have one bloodshed, or years of rebellion and destruction. In the cold logic of empire building, the math was cruel but simple. The Ottomans chose stability over sentiment, power over pity, empire over family. And here's the dark truth. It worked. For more than a century, this system kept the empire stable at moments when other empires would have torn themselves apart. Succession became cleaner, faster, more predictable. But the cost: generations of psychological trauma inside the palace. Princes growing up in golden cages, knowing that love and loyalty were illusions. Mothers terrified every time a sultan got sick. Rivalries that began in childhood ending in a night neither brother would forget. The law was tested immediately after Mehmed's death. His sons, Bayezid II and Cem, fought bitterly, as we covered. But Bayezid didn't execute Cem because Cem escaped. That mistake haunted the empire for decades. So the next generation, they didn't hesitate. And the generation after that, they mastered it. By the time the empire reached its golden age under Suleiman, Murad and Selim, fratricide wasn't shocking. It was expected. Here's the thing most people don't know. Even the sultans who enforced the law hated it. Bayezid wept for Cem. Selim grieved for his brothers. Suleiman was haunted by the fate of his sons, but they all followed the law. That's the tragedy. These weren't monsters. These were men raised in a system that forced them to choose between their empire and their blood. And the empire always won. In the Ottoman world, the throne was a volcano. Only one person could stand on top. Everyone else, brothers, cousins, nephews, lived at the edge of the crater. One wrong step, and they were gone. If the Ottoman Empire had a golden age, Prince Mustafa was supposed to be its golden heir. He was loved by the soldiers, respected by the generals, admired by scholars, popular with the people, and, this is important, he looked like the perfect successor. Tall, disciplined, charismatic, a natural leader, the kind of prince who didn't have to demand loyalty. It just happened. Some said he reminded people of Suleiman in his youth. Others said he might even surpass him. And that's where the trouble began. The real problem, the harem storm. Suleiman loved two people deeply in this period. His empire and Hürrem Sultan. Hürrem wasn't just a wife. She was a strategist, a diplomat, a woman who understood palace politics better than most grand viziers. To her, Mustafa wasn't a charming prince. He was a threat, because if Mustafa became sultan, her sons would be, well, very inconveniently in his way. And in the Ottoman world, in the way was not a safe place to be. So a quiet shadow war began. Court officials whispered in Suleiman's ear. Viziers fed him reports. Letters, some real, some forged, circulated. Stories spread that Mustafa was secretly plotting to take the throne early. Most were lies. Some were exaggerations. A few were planted to make the lies look real. But they all worked, because the one thing Suleiman feared most was becoming another sultan who was betrayed by his own son. And history told him it happened often. The Rustam Pasha operation, Hürrem's greatest ally? Her son-in-law Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, one of the most politically talented and feared men of the century. Rustam played his role with perfect timing. He intercepted letters. He staged reports. He manipulated perceptions. Think of it as an ancient-era political campaign. Except the election prize was the Ottoman throne, and the loser didn't retire to a peaceful villa. Rustam convinced Suleiman that Mustafa's popularity with the army wasn't respect, it was rebellion. And then came the sealed message that changed history. Your son plans to dethrone you. That was the moment everything snapped. Mustafa was camped with his troops when he received the news. Your father requests your presence. It sounded normal. A routine meeting. A royal formality. Mustafa had no reason to fear. He stood up, adjusted his armor, said goodbye to his closest commanders, mounted his horse, and rode toward the tent where his father waited. The soldiers lining the path watched silently. Some bowed. Some looked away. Many had a bad feeling they couldn't explain. Mustafa entered the tent. It was dimly lit. Silent. Too silent. He stepped forward. And suddenly, from both sides, the executioners sprang. Prince Mustafa fought back instantly. He wasn't weak. He wasn't surprised for long. He was a warrior prince raised in war. But the men assigned to this task were specialists. The struggle was violent, desperate, fast, tragic. Outside the tent, the army heard the noise. Some cried, some murmured, some reached for swords but were held back. They knew the truth. If they intervened, they'd be labeled traitors too. The fight ended. The tent fell still. Prince Mustafa, the future of the empire, was gone. When the executioners signaled that the task was done, Suleiman entered the tent, the greatest sultan in Ottoman history. The man who ruled 3 continents collapsed to his knees. This wasn't a sultan looking at a traitor. This was a father looking at his dead son. He wept. He trembled. He whispered prayers no one could hear. Every soldier outside felt it. The empire had just lost more than a prince. It had lost its future. The army hated Rustem Pasha for it. Some hated Hürrem. Others blamed Suleiman. Protests broke out inside the military ranks. Whispers filled the palace. Suleiman removed Rustem from power temporarily, just to calm the fury. Mustafa's supporters believed the Sultan had been tricked. He believed it too late. This moment marked the beginning of Suleiman's decline. He kept ruling. He kept conquering. He kept being magnificent. But something inside him broke permanently. The empire would grow, but never shine the same way again. Because when a father buries his own son, especially one destined for greatness, the world grows a little dimmer. When the dust settled after Mustafa's death, the Ottoman Empire entered a strange, heavy quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind where every corridor in the palace feels colder, every servant walks slower, every soldier speaks softer, as if the whole empire is waiting for something, but no one knows what. Mustafa had been the sun around which so many men orbited. When he vanished, those orbits collapsed into confusion, and the cracks began to show. For decades, the Janissaries had been feared across 3 continents. They were elite, disciplined, unbreakable, and fiercely loyal. But loyal to whom exactly? That was the problem. Most of them loved Mustafa. He trained with them, laughed with them, ate with them, and treated them like real warriors, not decorations. So when word spread that the Sultan had ordered his death, something shifted deep inside the core. Not rebellion, not open anger, something more dangerous. Disillusionment. A soldier who hates can still obey. A soldier who stops believing becomes unpredictable, and within weeks, the empire's most powerful military institution no longer trusted the man at the top. That was the beginning of a long-term problem. Suleiman didn't see coming. People like to imagine Suleiman as a superhuman ruler, the elegant poet king who won battles and wrote love letters in the same breath. But after Mustafa's death, the emperor looked like someone who carried a mountain on his shoulders. He stopped smiling, stopped laughing, stopped joking with his advisors. Some days he walked the palace gardens alone for hours, tracing the same paths over and over, like he was trying to escape his own mind. Other days he locked himself in his study, with only books, maps, and prayer beads. One ambassador wrote, "His Majesty rules the world, but sorrow rules His Majesty." And he wasn't wrong. The golden age wasn't over yet, but the light of it had dimmed. From a political standpoint, Hürrem had won the greatest power struggle of her life. Her sons now had a clear path to the throne. Her faction controlled the palace. Her influence was unmatched. But victory tasted nothing like she imagined, because the death of a prince, even a rival, isn't something you celebrate. It's something you feel. She sensed Suleiman drifting away from her, not with anger, not with blame, with grief. The kind of grief that puts distance between even 2 souls that once moved as one. Hürrem began to fall ill in this period. Some say it was natural, others say it was stress. A few whisper it was karmic. Whatever the reason, the radiant queen, who once captivated an empire, began fading, and the palace corridors, once ruled by her laughter, grew silent. With Mustafa gone, the question everyone asked, but never out loud, was, who becomes the next heir? Suleiman's remaining sons were Bayezid, emotional, impulsive, brave. Selim, calm, quiet, calculating, but fond of wine. Neither of them had Mustafa's charisma. Neither had his military appeal. Neither could unify the empire like he could. And that terrified the advisors. An empire this big, stretching from Hungary to Iraq, Egypt to Algeria, Arabia to Greece, needs a prince who can command armies, convince allies, and terrify enemies. Neither son fit the role perfectly. So the palace began to divide. Royal tutors, generals, even eunuchs choosing sides in a shadow war between Bayezid and Selim. What Suleiman had tried to prevent, his sons fighting each other, was now more likely than ever. Europe watched the Ottoman family drama with a smile. A giant empire, weakened not by armies, but by grief, mistrust, and political chaos. This was an opportunity. The Habsburgs in Austria strengthened their forts. Venice watched for openings in the Mediterranean. Persia tested the eastern frontiers, and small Balkan kingdoms whispered, maybe now, maybe finally. The Ottomans are vulnerable. They weren't. Not yet. But the illusion of weakness is almost as dangerous as real weakness. Suleiman's personal grief had become a geopolitical earthquake. Years passed, but Mustafa didn't disappear from the empire's memory. Poets wrote about him, artists painted him, soldiers whispered legends of the prince who should have been. In coffee houses across Istanbul, the common folk murmured, if Mustafa were alive, things would be different. Suleiman heard these whispers. He never punished anyone for saying them. He simply lowered his head and walked past. It was the closest thing to a confession he could offer. The death of Mustafa did more than break a father's heart. It broke the unspoken contract between ruler and ruled. The people believed the Sultan acted justly. The military believed the throne protected the strong. The dynasty believed divine blessing guided succession. But with Mustafa gone, the army questioned loyalty. The palace questioned destiny. The public questioned justice. Even if they still loved Suleiman, they feared his judgment. They feared palace politics. They feared the throne itself. This was the beginning of the end. Not immediately, not dramatically, but quietly, slowly, inevitably. The Ottoman decline didn't start on a battlefield. It started in a tent, with a father making a decision he could never undo. Silence turned into a slow-burning fever. By the time open war arrived, the palace had already bled its moral authority dry. Two brothers, shaped by the same court and the same father, now faced each other with armies in their hands and the memory of Mustafa in their mouths. What followed was not merely a contest for a crown. It was the collapse of a family, covenant, and the final, terrible punctuation on Suleiman's reign. Rumors, insults, and small slights fanned the flames. Bayezid, proud and restless, gathered a coalition of provincial notables and some uncertain janissaries who remembered Mustafa's strength and resented palace intrigue. Selim, colder and politically astute, quietly secured the support of the core elite. Loyal sipahis, key viziers, and the janissary commanders who feared disorder more than a bold prince. The palace was no longer a neutral place where disputes were settled. With seals and whispers, it had become the staging ground for civil war. The first pitched clashes were ugly and intimate. Fields outside Istanbul and Anatolian towns became theaters where brothers, followers tested each other, skirmish by skirmish for honor and survival. Bayezid rode with the ferocity of a son denied, striking fast and burning the outskirts of villages that refused him. Selim advanced with the methodical patience of a man who knew how to make others do the hard thinking for him. Each victory and loss reshaped the loyalties of soldiers who had once sworn to the Sultan, not to a faction. The decisive moments were not only in cannon smoke or cavalry charged, but in whispers across campfires and the quiet purchasing of loyalties. Commanders switched sides for pay. Governors abandoned garrisons to save their estates. Eunuchs passed notes between tents that felt like verdicts. Bayezid's temper made him magnetic and volatile. Selim's restraint made him reliable, and to many inevitable. The turning point was less a battle than a sequence of betrayals. A fortress that opened its gates after a whispered promise. A battalion that refused to fight its brothers. A council that declared for the calmer hand. Suleiman watched as his sons tore the realm he had built. The old sultan, weakened by grief and years of governance, could not repair what had been rent in secrecy and blood. He tried to mediate with petitions and decrees, but his voice no longer rallied the great houses or the restless soldiery. The empire that had marched confidently into Europe and Asia now watched a father fail to command his own blood. In the final tragic accounting, Suleiman's authority, moral, spiritual, and political, was the collateral damage of fratricide. When the smoke cleared, one son stood, the other banished or broken, and the court whispered of justice and necessity. But the winner inherited a throne weakened at its root. Key commanders had been alienated, the treasury thinned, and the court culture poisoned by suspicion. Beyond immediate losses, the war etched a dangerous precedent into Ottoman politics, the idea that the crown could be seized by force, and that fraternal slaughter was a viable path to power. Suleiman's golden age would still be sung by poets, but the tune carried a minor key now, a mournful measure for what was lost inside the palace. The violence between Selim and Bayezid did more than decide who sat on the throne. It ended an era of relative stability in succession and turned dynastic legitimacy into a fragile, contested thing. For Suleiman the Magnificent, the crown remained on his brow until death. But the image of a unified imperial house had shattered. From then on, every new accession would carry the shadow of brothers once turned into enemies. The secret war had become public memory, and the empire learned to fear the family that was supposed to secure it.